Well, hello there. We are back as we are every Thursday at 12:30 Pacific time, and it's good to be here.
It's the Charlie and Linda show.
That's right. And which one of us is Charlie? I keep forgetting. Well, anyway, before we leap into the subject of today, which I'm going to let you know about in a moment, if you've been watching these shows, you probably have noticed that I've never had a strap around my neck like this. And there is a reason for it, as there is for everything, although we don't know always what it is. But in this case, I do know what it is, and it's because I am wearing, you can't really see it, but this is, it's not a man purse. I know it might look like one, but it's actually the 21st century version of an arm sling. And you might wonder why I'm wearing an arm sling. Good question. Less than 48 hours ago, I had a total shoulder replacement in my right arm. And I mentioned the timing because I'm just so awestruck by how a surgery like that can, that you can begin to really heal and recover immediately from it. And how I just never would have imagined that less than 2 days later, I would be here. I didn't think I was going to be doing this week's show, but I'm here, and I'm in very, very little pain. So it's just pretty amazing. And there's actually what I see as a link between the theme of today's talk and my shoulder replacement surgery. I had known for quite a while that there was a problem with my shoulder. And like some of you, I have developed the skill of being able to rationalize putting things off. Come up with all kinds of justifications and rationalizations and excuses not to do it. But as you probably have discovered, if you're that way too, that at some point the chickens do come home to roost. And when they do, it's often a bigger mess than it would have been if you had just handled it earlier. So today we're going to talk about this thing that we call incompletions, which have to do with those areas of our life, particularly in regard to relationships, in which there are there's unfinished business. There are things that need to be cleared up, that need to be addressed. There's issues that are unfinished. And we don't always, and we often don't really address them directly. We put them off, and we get all kinds of reasons to do that. But the bottom line is that it rarely, if ever, goes away. And much more likely is that it's going to be, that same issue is going to be there. Plus, there's going to be penalties and fines for not dealing with it earlier. So we're here today to talk about how to finish unfinished business, how to get complete with things early on so that it doesn't deteriorate into something that is going to require you to wear a sling for 2 months. Mm-hmm. So you have anything to say about that?
Yes, I want to say something about your shoulder surgery, that I am in the role of taking care of Charlie for the next several weeks while his arm is in a healing mode, because he's got to keep it still. And of course, he's right-handed, so he can't do very much with his right hand, and he's not able to drive. And I just want to go on the record here as I'm really glad to have the opportunity to take good care of you, because you've been so good to me
Happy
for
to
such
give
a
you that
long
opportunity.
time. And one of the reasons that I feel so good about being able to be in the caregiver role is because Charlie has held a very high standard of excellence for our relationship. And we both have joined each other in holding this gold standard, going for the gold in terms of not allowing unresolved issues to lay around and like a pail of garbage that you don't take out, that it rots and there's a stench and you just get used to the stench and you override it, or you try to cover it up with some kind of perfume spray. That Charlie was willing to take out the garbage regularly with me, literally and figuratively, for the last 2.5 decades. And we had to learn this one the hard way, because back in the old day, we didn't have a standard that was this high, and we weren't jointly committed to holding the gold standard. And we allowed things that were incomplete in us as individuals and incomplete between the two of us to rot. And our relationship fell to an all-time low. And we write about that in That Which Doesn't Kill Us, our most recent book. And then how we learned to do better, how we learned to do the kind of repair rather than avoid leaning into the challenge of addressing the issues. And we know from our experience teaching and seeing couples in counseling that a lot of people, when they first start that process of investigating how come our trust is low, how come we don't feel connected with each other, how come we're not enjoying our relationship, they don't connect the dots. They don't see what a large causal factor leaving issues unattended to is. And they may have had many months, maybe years of incompletions that have stacked up. And they're just, they're just robbing the relationship of its well-being. So thank you, Charlie, for holding the gold standard. And thank you for learning with me how to bring up the issues and address the issues in an effective way. So if they didn't get resolved, because not all issues are resolvable and never get resolved, but they can at least lighten up so they don't have to be stealing our well-being, damaging our trust, and prompting us to feel disconnected, because I'm really enjoying feeling so connected with you almost all the time.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate your mentioning that not all issues can be resolved, even with the best couples. I mean, couples who are really the most fulfilled. The differences that they had coming into the marriage, into the relationship, in terms of preferences, in terms of styles of operating and communicating, in terms of personalities, to some degree, even in the case of certain values, they will never be resolved. And getting complete doesn't mean that you're finally both on the same page about everything. It means that you have gone from a point of being dissatisfied with something, or unhappy with it, or unfinished with it, and there's still residual thoughts and feelings in your mind or in the back of your mind that prevent you from being closer, more connected, more trusting of each other. That you've at least gotten to a point for now, for the time being, where you can live with those differences. Now, that doesn't mean that they're never going to show up again, but it does mean that if and when they do, there's a process that is necessary to go through in order to become more complete, to get more finished with things. So we're going to talk about that and let you know what some of those aspects of that process involve.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying a quick hi to Susie. She put a message on the message board. The first thing is you have to believe that it's possible to lighten the energy up. Because some people are in resignation and hopelessness, and I brought it up before, and he didn't want to talk to me about it, and so they just put it in the denial zone. So we're inviting you to take some of those issues out of the denial zone. Tell yourself the truth. I'm unhappy about this. I have a need that's not being met. It's an important need of mine. I have dissatisfaction about this, that, or the other thing. I have resentment about this, that, or the other thing. I have disappointment or sadness. So it starts with telling yourself the truth and also believing that it is possible that with finesse, with diplomacy, with a high level of skill in our communication, not demanding, not commanding, not putting the person on the defensive, not being manipulative, but inviting them into a conversation that we start with admitting the truth. There is an area of our relationship that needs attention. It's bothering me. Would you be willing to listen to how I'm feeling? And don't interrupt me. Let me speak. Maybe I need 5 minutes. Maybe I need 10 minutes. I've been holding this for a long time. And this is really important to me to get their agreement that there's something beneficial about discussing this, that it could have a beneficial effect for both people if they explore it and they take it out of the pile of incompletions to really look into it with an intention of having some kind of understanding about the issue.
So we've referred many times to the relationship guy, John Gottman, who's considered to be the expert on relationships. Not the only one, but he's held in very high esteem in the field. And John refers to what Linda's talking about as a softened startup. In other words, what we want to do is we want to open the conversation in an inviting way, not in a way that's going to activate the other person's defensiveness. Mm-hmm. So one example of how to best activate their defensiveness, if that's what you want to do, is to start with, I won't call this an invitation, it's a statement that many of you have used. The four most frightening words that a man can hear, which is, we need to talk. Because implicit in that statement is a command and a judgment. And so as soon as we hear something like that, we're going to go into a defensive mode before we even start the conversation. So we're really encouraging you to speak much more when you have these conversations in terms of me and I and my experience, as opposed to, pointing the finger of blame and shame and guilt at the other person. So rather than putting them on notice because of things that they've done to make us feel hurt or upset, we want to talk about what we're feeling. And we also want to extend an invitation that's going to make it more likely for them to accept it and want to talk without feeling anxious about, what I do wrong now.
So if you get your intention clear at the beginning that you want to have a successful outcome, you will be thinking about how to bring the subject up in a soft way rather than a combative or a blaming way. It will also prompt you to be thinking solution focus. If you're not just going to get stuck in complaint or criticism, which is even worse than complaint, and you start thinking about what I would really like to have happen out of this conversation is for you to understand why I'm so disappointed about whatever it is. And then you can give your partner some cues. Give them some cues, give them some clues about what would be workable for you. That's just a starter kit. You don't be too attached to it has to look a certain way, but you give them some ideas about it would be really helpful for me if this, and happened, rather than that is what's not working for me.
So we want to, in some ways, keep it more impersonal rather than directing personal judgments and directives towards your partner. So in other words, to speak in more abstract terms, but also to be very clear about wanting to be able to be more connected, wanting to deepen the trust in our relationship, or wanting to experience more mutual support, or wanting to re-engage in ways that we used to, that we seem to have gotten off track of. When we use the we word rather than the you word, it makes it much easier for your partner to be open to hearing it. The main reason we don't want to activate defensiveness in the other person, and sometimes we can't help it, because some of us are just more sensitive to judgment, criticism, and blame than others. But we want to do the best that we can, make our best effort to minimize the possibility of them getting defensive. The problem with that is it's not that it's a bad thing to do or that you're wrong or that you're hurting the person. The problem is that defensiveness limits and inhibits the other person's ability to be an open receptor to what you're saying, because they're more concerned about protecting themselves from what they're anticipating as an onslaught of criticism and judgment. Mm-hmm. So we want to minimize that so that they can be more open and receptive to hearing what you've got to say. And one other thing that one of the things that you do want to say is what in particular would be helpful for your partner to do or be or say, or how they could respond to you. How could they support you in your desire to get complete, in your desire to create a more intimate connection in your relationship, to give them some specifics if they're open to it. You might even want to ask them. There are a few things that I think would be helpful here right in this conversation. You know, one of them, for example, could be that you might want to ask them, I understand that you want to correct what I just said, and I do want to hear what you've got to say, but can you just let me finish? I'm almost done, and there's just a couple more things I want to say, and then I'll be much more able to be open to hearing you.
And when you're creating this inviting space and this safe space and this space of exploration, asking questions is really helpful. You know, not reprimands or accusations designed as questions like what's wrong with you, but real questions that come from curiosity and wonder. Like, do you have some ideas about how this certain challenge could be improved? Let me hear your take on it. Are you feeling dissatisfied with it as well? Am I the only one that's feeling discomfort with this? Or do you feel some kind of dissatisfaction with it too? Questions usually open up communication if they're real questions coming from a place of wonder. Another thing that's really helpful is to speak more about ourselves, our own feelings, our own needs, especially the really vulnerable, tender ones, like I'm afraid, or I'm lonely, or I'm sad, or I'm hurt. These are more likely to create heart-to-heart connections. So it's difficult to speak about a challenge without mentioning what they may be doing or not doing, or saying or not saying, but you don't want the emphasis on them. You always want to keep the emphasis on yourself about what we're feeling, you know, in response to what they're doing or not doing, or saying or not saying, and put the emphasis on the solution and what would work even better for me. And then invite them to see through your eyes. Invite them to see the vision that you are holding of how beneficial this could be for both of you. And then pause and give them a chance to take it in and really be with it. And then ask them, what do you hear me saying? Because there may be so much distortion going on that they really aren't getting the message. And if you ask them to paraphrase what you offered to them and they give it back in a way that is off the mark, you have a chance to have another go at it, and maybe they'll get it on the second or the third try. But people get so frightened, and they have old hurts that they misinterpret things so much. You sometimes have to be very patient with the process and have a bunch of rounds with it until they really understand what you're saying.
You know, these last two things that Linda mentioned are really very crucial to having a successful conversation with somebody when there's a grievance to be shared. The part about paraphrasing is really helpful, because in a really disturbing number of occasions that we have observed in working with couples, there can be a gross misinterpretation for what the person said. because they'll say something and that will trigger some concern, some fear, some anger, something that will grab the receiver's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not even really present immediately after they've received that, because they're dealing with their own reactivity. And so what happens is that if you don't ask them what they heard you say, then you don't ever have a chance to find out whether what they're responding to is actually congruent with what you just said. You don't know. So it's always a good idea whether the speaker asks the other person to paraphrase, what did you hear me say, in their own words, or if you're the listener, to take that responsibility and then mention to your partner, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're wanting me to, or you're feeling this, or you're needing this. Is that true? Is that correct? Is that what you're saying? And then the other person gets a chance to say, yes, that's it, or no, it's not. Let me see if I can reword that, because I want to make sure we're both on the same page here. So that's a really helpful thing to do when you're having this conversation.
And here's another thing that's really helpful. Some of these topics have been avoided for good reason. They're painful. They may have catalyzed angry interchanges, and so you stashed them, in the freezer. And when you take them out and thaw them out and you warm them up, they sometimes get overheated. And there was a good reason why you put those aside, because you didn't quite trust yourself yet to deal with it effectively. And sometimes the mind says, better to leave it aside. Let's don't go there. I had clients years ago used to call that the no-fly zones, And there are relationships where there isn't any topic that's a no-fly zone. There are relationships that are so strong and so sturdy and so spacious and so loving and trusting that there is no taboo subject. That's the goal, is to get to a place where you might be able to feel that level of trust and that level of safety, that there's so much goodwill that any subject is fair to bring out and useful to bring out. But if in the process of dealing with some of these subjects that are really and truly gnarly, you have to take a break and go and compose yourself, that is a skillful choice to make. That is not being avoidant, that's being intelligent. That you may need a brief break and then come back.
Being avoidant is not good, in case you haven't noticed.
It's dangerous.
Our friend Sam Keen has a way of describing the real meaning of avoidance. And it's actually not one word, but it's 3 words. Void dance. That there is a void between you and your partner. And voids are pretty frightening because they're usually black and they're unknown, and you don't want to step into it because you don't know where you're going to land when you do. But when you refuse to deal with things that need to be addressed, you are doing an avoid dance with your partner. And that can and often does create major problems. So we want to be careful not to create a void and not to step into it if there is one. And if we do experience that there is something there that is activating anxiety or fear or some negative feelings, the way to cross that void is to be willing to acknowledge what you are feeling in this moment right now, just to tell the truth about it.
And there's an important myth that I would like to bust, that sometimes people give themselves an out by saying, I missed my chance. I didn't bring it up at the time and it's too late now. There is no statute of limitations on incompletions. And sometimes people had a disappointment on their wedding night or their honeymoon at the birth of their baby, or, when my parents came to visit us, you disappointed me because you weren't even here and I wanted you to get close to my family and my siblings. And it maybe was 10 years ago. Maybe it was 15 years ago. Maybe it was 20 years ago. If it's still alive for you now, it's alive in your experience. And with a proper approach, there can be some letting go of that heavy energy that you may have been carrying for years that you didn't let bubble up. We're inviting you to let it come up out of the unconscious and bubble up for you to feel fortified to be able to handle it, no matter how old it is, no matter how scary it is, no matter how you may have had breakdowns in trying to address it before. These things, so many of them are clean upable as long as there's a willingness and an openness on both sides. When you have gone through the steps and you come to the end, no matter how the conversation has gone, if you've had to take breaks or if you're still tense at the end, or particularly if things have lightened up a lot, you want to congratulate yourself and congratulate your partner and say, we really made some headway with this. And even if it's very tense and it didn't go as well as you had hoped, always thank them for getting in the ring with you, for being willing to participate with you, because that deserves acknowledgement. Just the willingness to address it. And hopefully you'll learn from the breakdowns how when you bring that incompletion up the next time, you may be even more effective than you were this time.
So it's really just about practice.
Yep.
Most of you probably are aware of a lot of the suggestions that we've made today. It's not so much that we don't know what works, but it's that we let ourselves off the hook by not accepting the challenge of practicing when the heat is on, when we're, in the fire. And in any committed partnership, you're going to have those experiences. The question is, can I really honor my commitment to be a more understanding, compassionate, honest person, and do whatever I can do to promote greater trust and connection and respect in this relationship? And that is not easy to do, particularly when we're feeling like we're in danger. So we want to make our communications as safe as possible so that we can both be willing to be vulnerable and honest.
So we're the voice of experience, our own personal experience, in many couples that we've worked with over the many decades that we've been doing this work, which is 4.5 decades now. So we have lots of evidence that even couples that have very broken down relationships, when they finally get on the path where they want zero tolerance for having these incompletions, and they start really working together as a team, they make headway. They have successes. So don't think that that's for other people. Those are for the lucky few. No, it's available for all of us. All of us ordinary folks can have extraordinary relationships. We have to put the work into them, but it is possible. And it is one of the best things that you can do for your relationship is to raise the standard, to grow the courage, to bring up the tough issues, and you have nothing to lose but your incompletions.
So that about wraps it up for today. Next week, we're going to be talking about the real reason why couples who are so different from each other get attracted to each other. So if you've ever wondered about that, tune in. Until then,
We'll see you next week.
Adios.